The night trembled over Coruscant as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. Within the Senate chamber, destiny teetered on a knife's edge. Anakin Skywalker stood before Chancellor Palpatine. Mentor, deceiver, serpent, whose voice slithered through the air with promises of power and immortality. But in this world, something shifted. It was not rage that filled Anakin's chest, but the echo of Padme's heartbeat, steady and soft, calling him home. The lights flickered across his eyes, half shadow, half light, a war of reflection. The saber in his hand hummed, but he did not strike. He saw through the veil, through the illusion of control, and for the first time truly understood balance. The Force whispered not of victory, but of peace. And in that silence, the galaxy changed forever. Or, misspacing, forever. The sun rose over Coruscant with uncommon stillness. For the first time in years, there were no blaster echoes, no alarms of war, only the hum of speeders and the distant chorus of city life waking. Anakin stood on the temple balcony beside Obi-Wan, the silence between them vast yet full. Obi-Wan's voice broke softly through the dawn. "You've done what I could not, Anakin." Anakin only nodded, watching the light spread over the skyline. He didn't feel like a warrior anymore. He felt like a guardian. Not of the Republic, but of peace itself. Padme arrived later that morning. The moment she saw him, all the fear she had hidden behind her smile melted away. They embraced in the temple courtyard, where the wind carried the fragrance of flowers and repainted stone. No council meeting, no war. No secret stood between them anymore, only truth. She whispered against his chest, "You chose love." And for the first time, Anakin smiled not as a soldier, but as a man who finally understood what it meant to be free. Far away, in the depths of the Senate, Palpatine sat in silence. The dark side coiled around him, weakened and confused, its tendrils fading like smoke. His plan, centuries in the making, had unraveled not by combat but by compassion. He watched the light of morning fill his chamber, and for the first time, he felt the coldness of being truly alone. The Sith had not been defeated by the sword, but by the heart. That evening, the Jedi Temple bells rang across Coruscant, not as a call to arms, but as a hymn of peace. Anakin stood among the younglings, the warmth of Padme's hand in his. He looked to the horizon, where the stars began to shimmer, and whispered quietly, "The Force is balance." It was not a victory cry, nor a farewell. It was a promise that the light would never be lost again. Months passed, and the galaxy began to breathe again. The fires of war dimmed into the quiet hum of reconstruction. On Naboo, Padme led the peace accords beneath banners of starlight, while Anakin stood nearby, not as a Jedi general, but as a protector, her silent anchor. The ghosts of battle no longer haunted him. He felt the Force differently now, not as a storm, but as a river, steady and clear. The galaxy that once tore itself apart was beginning to heal, and for the first time, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a promise. In the great hall of the rebuilt Jedi Temple, Master Yoda sat once more beneath the golden canopy of the archives. Younglings filled the room with laughter, their voices bright against the stillness of ancient walls. Obi-Wan watched Anakin guide a group of initiates through a training exercise, not with commands, but with patience. He spoke softly of feeling, of balance, of empathy. It was a lesson no holocron had ever taught. Obi-Wan's eyes softened, for he knew the prophecy had never been about destruction. It had always been about harmony. Ahsoka returned to the Order in those days, drawn by the peace Anakin had created. When she entered the temple, their eyes met across the hall. 1,000 unspoken apologies and memories between them. No words were needed, only the quiet understanding of two souls who had walked through darkness and found their way back. Together, they began training the next generation, teaching that the Force was not a weapon, but a song, and every voice that joined it made the galaxy brighter. While peace bloomed across the core worlds, shadows still lingered at the galaxy's edge. In a remote outpost above Ryloth, remnants of the old empire whispered of vengeance. Anakin sensed it, not as threat, but as sorrow refusing to fade. He stood with Obi-Wan aboard a Republic cruiser, watching the stars drift past. "I once believed the Force chose us to destroy," he said quietly. Obi-Wan smiled faintly. "Perhaps it chose us to heal instead." Their words vanished into the hum of hyperspace, carried away like prayer. That night, Anakin and Padme sat by the lake on Naboo. The wind was gentle, carrying the fragrance of lilacs and wet stone. Padme leaned her head on his shoulder, their silhouettes mirrored in the still water. They spoke of their children. Luke's questions about stars, Leia's courage with words far beyond her years. The galaxy was quiet again, yet within that stillness lived purpose. Anakin felt the Force pulse gently through the night sky, not demanding, not warning, simply existing. And he knew this peace, fragile and eternal, was worth everything he had given up. The galaxy glowed under peace, but peace is fragile. In the cold silence between stars, the remnants of the Empire gathered like dust, swept beneath a great light. On an abandoned world of black glass and ash, cloaked figures knelt before a hologram, the flickering image of a face long thought, gone. Palpatine's voice, fractured and spectral, whispered through static. He was no longer flesh but shadow. A thought, a scar etched into the Force, and though his power had waned, his will had not. The galaxy, he vowed, would learn that light, unguarded, invites its own darkness. Far above Naboo, Anakin awoke from a vision. A storm of memory, Palpatine's grin, Mustafar's fire, his own reflection lost in darkness. But this time, he saw something new. The darkness was not outside him anymore. It waited quietly within, asking to be understood. He stood at the edge of Padme's balcony, the night wind stirring his cloak. He realized the truth he had once feared. Balance did not mean the absence of shadow. It meant the acceptance of both. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Ahsoka discovered an encrypted signal within the old holonet, an ancient code once used by Imperial intelligence. She followed it through layers of static until the source emerged a transmission from the Outer Rim. The voice was faint but unmistakable. "Balance is weakness," it hissed. She froze. The dark side had survived, not in armies or weapons, but in whispers. The shadows had learned patience. In the Jedi Council chamber, the Masters gathered. Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Yoda, and Anakin stood together for the first time since the wars had ended. The chamber was calm, but the air trembled with memory. They spoke of the transmission, its origins, its warning. "The dark cannot be destroyed," Yoda murmured. "Only understood." Anakin bowed his head, realizing the battle had never been against others, but within himself. Ahsoka placed her hand on his arm, and for a brief moment the council was silent, united not by fear but by understanding. That evening, Anakin stood alone in the temple gardens. He gazed at the stars shimmering through the canopy, listening to the wind sigh through the trees planted after the war. He felt both light and darkness pulse through the Force, no longer enemies but partners in a grander rhythm. He smiled softly, knowing that to lead others, he must first master his own heart. Somewhere beyond the stars, Palpatine's voice still lingered, faint as smoke. But Anakin's answer came not in anger, nor in fear, only in peace. The years passed softly, like dawn spreading across the stars. Within the walls of the rebuilt temple, new laughter filled the air. The voices of the next generation. Among them ran two children, bright as twin suns, Luke and Leia Skywalker. Their curiosity was endless, their energy boundless. Anakin watched from the garden steps, his heart full yet steady. He was no longer the galaxy's storm. He had become its calm. The prophecy had not ended with him. It had merely begun anew in the light of his children's eyes. Training Luke was like taming sunlight. Bright, wild, untamed. His saber strikes were swift and instinctive, guided by raw emotion. Anakin saw himself in every movement, and through patience, taught him what he had once refused to learn: stillness. Leia, meanwhile, trained in diplomacy and the meditative arts under Padme and Ahsoka's watch. Where Luke's strength was motion, hers was knowing. Together they became balance incarnate, the perfect mirror of their father's journey. At night, Anakin would tell them stories of the stars, of heroes who fell and rose again, of wars that ended, and of the peace they now guarded. Leia would rest her head on Padme's lap, eyes heavy with wonder, while Luke would stare upward as if the constellations themselves were waiting for him to answer. Anakin spoke softly, his voice weaving the night into a lullaby. He told them the truth of darkness, that it was not to be feared, but to be understood. It was his greatest gift to them, not victory, but wisdom. Yet, even peace carries its shadows. Luke, restless and curious, began to question the limits of the Jedi. Why must one deny anger if it can protect those they love? Anakin listened, the question echoing in his own heart. A question he once answered with fire, but this time he smiled. Because love without fear is stronger than power born of it, he said. In that moment, he realized he was not teaching Luke to avoid his mistakes. He was teaching him to surpass them. Later that evening, when the temple bells tolled, low and distant, Anakin stood before the great statue of Qui-Gon Jinn. He closed his eyes and felt the presence of his old masters, Obi-Wan, Yoda, Qui-Gon. Not as ghosts, but as whispers in the Force. He bowed his head in gratitude. Their teachings had carried him here, but it was love that had saved him. The prophecy of the Chosen One was not about ending darkness. It was about illuminating it with understanding, and through his children that light would endure forever. The night before the solstice, the stars dimmed. Across the galaxy, faint tremors rippled through the Force, whispers, cold and old, threading through dreams. Anakin awoke in his chamber, his breath shallow, his heart still as glass. The air shimmered with a presence he knew too well. Palpatine's voice, faint and distant, slithered through his thoughts. You cannot destroy what you are, my boy. Darkness is you. Anakin rose, the old pain stirring, the memory of fire licking at his mind. But this time, he did not reach for his weapon. He reached inward, into light, into love, into balance. Palpatine's shadow grew stronger, feeding on doubt. Visions of Mustafar's flames bled into the room, memories reborn in crimson light. Anakin saw the version of himself he could have become. Burning eyes, black armor, the hollow echo of breathing that never stopped. The dark phantom extended its hand. You could have ruled the stars, it hissed. Anakin stepped forward, calm as dawn. I was never meant to rule, he whispered. I was meant to serve. And the vision trembled, uncertain for the first time. Across the galaxy, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan felt the tremor through the Force. They gathered with Yoda in the meditation hall, where the air rippled with tension. They knew this confrontation was not physical. Interfere. We must not, Yoda murmured. This battle within the Chosen One lies alone. Obi-Wan closed his eyes and whispered, Then may the Force be with him, in all its light and all its shadow. The chamber filled with golden silence as they joined their hearts to his, lending strength through stillness. In the heart of his vision, Anakin faced the Phantom once more. This time, it was not Palpatine, nor the armored figure, but his younger self. The boy from Tatooine stood before him, eyes full of longing and fear. "Will I always be alone?" the child asked. Anakin knelt, his expression breaking into quiet tenderness. He took the boy's trembling hand and whispered, "Never again." As he embraced the child, the darkness melted away like smoke under sunlight, for in forgiveness, the shadow found its end. When the vision faded, dawn had arrived. Anakin stood once more in the temple garden, the air cool and new. Padme approached quietly, her presence as radiant as the morning sun. He turned to her, weary but free, and smiled. "The darkness is gone," he said softly. Padme shook her head, her hand resting over his heart. "No, you've simply learned to walk with it." He closed his eyes and let the wind move through his hair. For the first time in his life, he was whole. The galaxy felt different now, as though an invisible weight had lifted from every world. The Force no longer pulsed in conflict, it breathed. Anakin walked through the temple's gardens, feeling it hum beneath his feet. Every sound, every breath, every flicker of light spoke in unison. He no longer felt apart from it. He was it. The Chosen One had not brought balance by victory, but by surrender. Peace was not won. It was understood. The new Jedi Order flourished under this philosophy. No longer bound by fear of attachment or obsession with purity, the Jedi learned to feel without falling, to love without losing themselves. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan guided the council with quiet grace, while Padme united worlds through compassion rather than decree. Even the former separatist systems began to join again, not under Republic law, but under shared trust. For the first time in living memory, there was no rebellion, only belonging. Far beyond Coruscant, on the edge of known space, Anakin returned to Mustafar, the world that once nearly consumed him. But where fire once raged, rivers now flowed. The planet had healed as he had. He knelt by the edge of a cooled lava basin, now a lake of black glass, and pressed his palm to its surface. He felt neither pain nor memory, only stillness. The planet reflected him perfectly scarred, but whole. That evening, Anakin spoke before the new generation of Jedi. He did not speak of war or heroism, but of empathy. "Fear will visit you," he told them, "as it visited me. Do not fight it. Listen to it. Let it teach you what you are afraid to lose." The hall was silent, not in reverence, but in peace, for they understood that the Jedi were no longer guardians of rules, but keepers of balance. Later that night, Anakin and Padme stood on the temple balcony, watching the stars. Leia slept in Padme's arms, while Luke dozed nearby beside a small holobook. The galaxy stretched before them, endless, luminous, alive. Anakin wrapped his arm around Padme and whispered, "The Force feels quiet." Padme smiled. "Maybe it's resting." He looked at the stars one last time before closing his eyes. If the Force was at peace, so was he. Night fell gently upon the galaxy. No longer heavy with the weight of war, it shimmered with quiet constellations. Each star a story, each world a breath. On Naboo, the air was cool and fragrant. Anakin walked through the gardens where once he had confessed his dreams to Padme, the scent of lilies brushing past him like memory. He paused beneath a willow tree, gazing at the stars reflected in the lake. The Force whispered, not as command, not as trial, but as song. Every note was peace, every silence a blessing. From the edge of the galaxy, the Force flowed like a tide, connecting all things. On Coruscant, the temple bells chimed, their song carried across hyperspace to Naboo and beyond. Ahsoka felt it while meditating beneath the temple spires. Obi-Wan, watching twin suns set on Tatooine. Yoda, in his final years, smiling faintly at the sound of balance fulfilled. No empire, no rebellion, only the living force, endless, eternal, at rest. Luke and Leia grew strong in the ways of the Force, but stronger still in compassion. They traveled with their parents across distant worlds, healing, teaching, listening. The Force was no longer divided between dark and light. It flowed through all, guiding hands that built rather than broke. Children across the galaxy learned that heroes were not born in battle, but in kindness. And so, the Skywalker legacy became not legend, but lullaby. As the years passed, Anakin's hair silvered, but his eyes remained bright. He no longer carried a saber, for he needed no weapon. The galaxy was self-sustaining now, guided not by fear of darkness, but by wisdom of balance. On quiet nights, he would stand beneath the stars and listen to the Force breathe, each pulse a reminder that peace, once fragile, had become the galaxy's heartbeat. He had fulfilled his destiny, not by ending war, but by ending the need for it. When Anakin finally became one with the Force, there was no pain, only warmth, endless and quiet. Padme sat by his side, their hands entwined. As his breath stilled, the night sky outside seemed to bloom with light. 1,000 stars igniting at once, their glow rippling across the galaxy. His voice echoed, not in words, but in feeling peace, love, balance. The Force hummed softly, like a cradle song for all creation. And the galaxy at last fell asleep in light.